Welcome to Health System CI's interview with Dr. John Halamka, president of the Mayo Clinic Platform. I'm Anthony Guerra, founder and editor in chief. Dr. Halamka, thanks for joining me today, my old friend.
And always a joy to talk to you because, there's always something fascinating brewing in the industry, and you always ask the great questions.
Well, you're very kind, very kind. And talk about something fascinating. I spoke to someone the other day who had been in the industry for a while, not as long as you perhaps, but referring to AI, referring to the pace of change, said it's historic, unbelievable, breakneck, amazing. Just the evolution of things, how things are changing by the day. And your thoughts on that. Do you agree that this is historic?
Well, what a fascinating question. So, as you pointed out, I'm a 63-year-old person, and I know this is going to sound ridiculous, but I've been working on AI for 50 years. Because, yes, when I was 13, I had access to some early Lisp primitive languages and built some chatbots, and that was the 1970s. This is a overnight revolution, 50 years in the making. So you
Uh-huh.
have to understand it looks really extraordinary from the outside, but we've been working on this for 5 decades. And it is the natural evolution of 5 decades of work that has led us to where we are today. So, sure, products and services are being released at a fast clip, but that's only because the building that has already been created over 5 decades.
Right. What about the idea that I mean something fundamentally shifted and tweaked? Would it be the release of Chat GPT that sort of sort of telemedicine, you could say telemedicine was being worked on for years and years, and COVID comes along and, hyperdrive for that. Do you see something similar with, I know it's been going for 50 years, but something happened recently. Feels like it.
Well, sure, but I always break these things down into technology, policy, and culture. So when I started doing AI, it was on an 8080 chip. I mean, you're old enough to remember 8080 chips. And so I had almost 2K of RAM. Wow. Well, think today, you can get petabytes of storage, you can get teraflops of compute for pennies.
Right.
And so the technology of storage and compute and tooling, the open source that is available to us, is radically different in 2025 than it has been in the past. So, yes, the technology is there. But two, there has been a set of policies, Coalition for Health AI and others have come together to say, well, how should we develop AI? Where should we use AI? How should we validate? And what kind of guidelines and guardrails should we have? So, sort of a sense of how we can move forward quickly. But culturally, as you pointed out, there's a huge change. In 2022, would you have gone to a cocktail party and talked about AI? Probably no.
No.
Well, yeah, and then of course November 2022, we got Chat GPT, and now you can't go to a cocktail party
Mm.
without 5 seconds into the conversation, somebody mentioning AI something. Yeah, and so yes,
Yeah.
the cultural change, which has also meant investment change and focus, has developed since the release of Chat GPT.
So what I'm sensing, when I talk to people is there's a pressure on IT executives. There's a pressure to be seen as active, to be active in terms of utilizing these technologies to help with pain points in the health system. They talk a lot about the strategic objectives of the health system. And you need to have those as your true north. And then trying to apply this tool to those objectives. So trying to be focused and not have a shiny tool and look for a place to use it. Start with your problems. Although, you can come from both directions on this, but talk to me about this sense that I feel that IT executives are under this sense of they're under pressure in a couple ways. One is again to utilize this tool, and the other thing is to stay up on it. I've talked to people again, they talk about the pace of change in the technology itself. and how you need to be well versed in this stuff if you're going to advise your organization about it, which makes sense. But I think the difficulty is it's evolving so quickly that there's some pressure there to stay on top of it, to be that learned expert, and then to make things happen, to do pilots, to not fall behind. For example, with ambient listening, if you don't have something in a health system where your clinicians are being helped with a tool like this in terms of making their notes, to me today, you are quite behind. What are your thoughts?
Sure. So, as you can guess, I talk to hospital leaders in the C suite all over the world every week. Does a single one of them tell me they need AI? No. What they say is, I've got critical strategic and business problems, as you pointed out. My margins are thin. It is hard to hire and retain specialists, and everyone is burned out. So, what levers can I pull? Because I have limited budgets and limited time. And as you suggest, the digital officer or the CIO is then asked, solve these business problems, will you?
Right,
And it turns out, well, oh, okay, margin pressure could be addressed in two ways if you increase revenue, because maybe you're producing bills and documents that are more accurate and therefore reimbursed at a higher rate. Oh, great.
right,
So put in AI tools to help with that. Or
right.
maybe you can reduce burden so that clinicians are actually practicing at the top of their license. And AI tools can help with that. And yes, maybe you don't have access to the world's best specialists, but the world's best specialists can train AI tools to augment your work so that you can practice at a higher level. So, exactly your point. The urgency is to solve the strategic problems. AI just so happens to be in the right place at the right time to help.
What about the idea that I've been hearing that, you know, it's there's fundamentally something different about this technology that requires a different approach. It's not just the next technology, it's not just another tool. This is of a different kind that requires some degree of a different approach from governance. And people are trying to figure out currently how much this needs to track differently from traditional IT governance and how much it can weave into traditional IT governance and where and how those two depart and come together. At least that's the sense I get in my discussions. This is currently evolving. And again, you have this sense of not totally separate, but not totally together. So what are your thoughts around the idea that this requires a different approach, both on the side of ingesting it into a health system, and it can come in a number of ways, and in the side of teaching clinicians how to use it?
Well, sure. So let's address those. I'll use some clinical examples. Suppose there is an FDA approved algorithm that is, it's been judged by the FDA to be safe, because that's what the FDA does through software as a medical device. Should you use it with your clinicians? Is that the role of the IT department, just to go buy something off the shelf, check a box that it's FDA software as a medical device designated and deploy it? Well, to your point, it's more complicated than that.
Mm,
And that is what you find. One, there are groups in the hospital that want to make sure it's safe, fair, appropriate, if effective. And they'll want to qualify it on their local population. Maybe the FDA put this thing through software as a medical device, but it was developed for educated urban professionals, and you're in a rural, a low income location, the
mhm,
algorithm may not work at all. Right.
mhm.
So, point to be made, there has to be some validation or qualification for your local population. But also, it's not so easy just to get adoption. I mean, I've been a physician for 40 years, and I can tell you physicians are just generally resistant to change. If you say, here's a cool new technology, the physicians are going to say, well, I don't know. Things have been working pretty well. Why do I need to change now? So you need to motivate them by showing them it will free up time, enhance quality, help them with patient satisfaction, something like that. So that's why governance and processes around AI are really important. And it's just different than any other software stack.
Um, yeah, so you mentioned algorithms. And again, this is where I can use some education and I get a little confused. Um, Algorithms are one thing. I've been talking to people about the deployment of agents and bots, um, and different ways that those things can be deployed. They can be built. They can be purchased from different types of companies. Um, so what are your thoughts around this? If somebody wants to deploy some sort of agent, there's different ways they can go about making that happen. Some put more work on themselves and more risk. Some outsource that to different types of vendors that may do it. Some vendors may be more horizontal and put these things together with less intimate knowledge of workflows and particular technologies that you may have. Some may be more entrenched, incumbent in healthcare vendors. There seems to be a lot of different ways that you can sort of bring these technologies into your health system that have different levels of risk and require different levels of expertise. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah. So remember, as we talk about these terms of art, predictive AI is just math, right? I'm going to go look at a million patients. And then for the patient who comes in today, I'm going to do math to see if they're like those million patients. That's predictive AI. Generative AI, as you describe with large language models, is training a foundation model with vast amounts of multimodal data and have it return in plain language something that may or may not be accurate. That's the
Yeah,
problem. At the
yeah,
time, it'll be wrong. Agentic AI is simply a term of art that says I'm going to connect my AI system such that it can take autonomous action without human supervision. And you could guess, I mean, certain kinds of agents I would trust. Here's a summer camp form. Go fill it out for me. If it gets it wrong, whatever.
right.
And so when one thinks of agentic AI, it's all going to be a function of risk. And what if the agentic AI does its job poorly? Does it need to have human review? Uh, would you even consider agentic AI for something like adjusting an IV pump?
Oh
I
boy.
don't think I would.
Yeah.
I would trust an AI to make recommendations about optimal medication administration, for then a human can interpret those recommendations and program the pump.
With agentic AI, you can have LLMs being part of that whole flow. They're in there. They can be in there.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. And so what you find, again, these terms of art evolve so rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
We used this term last year called RAG, or retrieval
Yeah, yeah.
augmented generation, where I take static data and put an LLM on top of static data, and then I can talk to the AI about that static data. Hey, could you show me information on this disease state? And it does beautifully. Well, but the problem is you're talking about workflows that aren't static. They're dynamic. There are databases where the situation may change very rapidly. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where, again, I hate to use these acronyms, but Model Context Protocol, or MCP, was invented by Anthropic and open sourced to connect LLMs to dynamic data sources, dynamic databases, situational awareness, where then you could use an LLM, as you say, in a workflow and
Right.
say, oh, based on everything going on in the hospital at the moment, what should we do? And it will give you a recommendation.
Any more thoughts around risk? There's this idea that if you start down this road and start doing different things, you really need to understand what you're doing as an IT executive. The risk could be coming into the organization through these technologies unless you deeply understand them in ways you may not realize, and it may be beyond cyber risk and different kinds of risk. What are your thoughts around sort of any unrealized or uncontemplated risk that these tools carry with them?
Well, sure. So, first, in any innovation, in any breakthrough area, I recommend don't do it yourself, do it with a community. Right? And so, just as you are gathering people together for what you do, it's sharing knowledge, sharing experience. The Coalition for Health AI, chai.org, is now 4,000 companies working together in the context of a nonprofit convener to talk about these issues you raise. How do we assess risk? How do we assess safety? How do we assess quality? So do it in whatever educational or collaborative setting you trust so that you don't have to do this alone. But also do recognize that this is math, not magic. And so some of the things are going to be explainable, and
Mhm.
some of the things are going to be not so explainable. They'll be black boxes. And so the question is, when does your organization feel that turning a black box onto a workflow process is okay?
Mm.
And again, I'll tell you because I talk to organizations about this every day. Supply chain. Suppose by accident we ordered too many band-aids. Whatever. Revenue cycle. Suppose that it processed 90,000 bills and got one wrong. Okay, you resubmit. So a point to be made is that most organizations are starting with administrative kinds of simplification, ambient listening, as you said at the beginning of our conversation, because these things are unlikely to do harm,
Mhm.
but they're typically waiting for things like clinical decision support or fully integrated clinical device agentic AI. That's really pretty edgy stuff.
Mhm. What are your thoughts around maintaining flexibility in terms of IT investments? Things are moving along so rapidly. Do you see the potential for making kind of a bet on a particular type of technology and that turning out to be not the way things go? Sometimes some of these very large organizations, Google, even Epic, and they're different kinds of companies, but sometimes the bets that they place. Um, Impact what you're doing. If they go left and you thought they were gonna go right, it can be a little confusing. Does that make sense in any way in terms of the technologies that are used here?
Absolutely. So you may remember that I did my postdoctoral work at MIT, and my professors at MIT told me the following: technologies will come and go, they will change. No matter how good the technology, it will have a life cycle.
Mhm,
But the engineering principles will ultimately not change so much. So, anytime you build a system, use what they would call abstraction layers. So, that means I can take out one component and plug in another. Oh, this one is end of life. This one isn't working so well. Great. Take it out, put in something else. So, everything that I do at Mayo Clinic Platform, or in fact, everything I do in Unity Farm Sanctuary, is built on the concept of vendor neutrality and the capacity to replace any component with any other component over time. So that principle really important. Be very careful of vendor lock-in and do everything you can to remain cloud neutral and technology neutral, but the engineering idea of creating a workflow and components along that workflow and replacing components when they break or improved certainly seems to work well.
how deeply do you think, AI is gonna impact the practice of clinical care? And that question needs a time frame on it. You could say within 5 years, you think it's gonna dramatically impact the way physicians practice care. People say this is more potential than you think in the long run, but less in the short run, meaning some of these use cases is a little premature for some of these things, especially in the clinical space. And that's a real distinction, obviously, that you hear in these conversations is we're really comfortable in revenue cycle, as you mentioned, supply chain, very comfortable. But certainly clinical, a whole nother area, human in the loop, cautious, careful, makes total sense. Do you see long-term, deep impact on clinical care?
Well, and the answer is absolutely. And I wouldn't even say long term. I think it's pretty immediate. And let me give you some case examples. Remember, there'll be lots and lots of use cases here. So we'll go through some concrete ones. Anthony is way too young to need colonoscopies. But when Anthony has a colonoscopy, does he want a human to look at those images, Or does he want a human augmented by AI to review those images and find the polyps so tiny that human eyes can't see them? Well, the
Hmm.
answer is you'll want the AI augmented option, I would guess. And
Right.
Mayo does that now for every endoscopy study. AI secondary review of all images we gather when we do colonoscopy. And by the way, the AI is 5 times better than the best human, just because our eyes are somewhat limited. Or another example, my wife, as you know, had breast cancer in December of 2011 and needed radiation therapy. Now, if you understand radiation therapy, the idea is target the tumor, but not nerves, arteries, and veins around the tumor. That's a lot of physics. And of course, you hire physicists and humans, and they do all the math and they get the radiation in exactly the right place. But remember, AI is a bunch of math. It's really good at
Hmm.
figuring out how to shape a beam so that it hits the tumor and not the surrounding tissue.
Hmm.
And so, similarly, that's what Mayo does for radiation therapy. It's augmenting human decision making with AI. So these are all real. They're all in use today. And I think almost every radiology department is using AI today in some fashion to overread chest x-rays, look for fractures, bleeding in the brain, that kind of thing. Very common to see that. So these are not replacing human decision making, but they are certainly augmenting human observations.
Let's talk a little bit about pilots. I would imagine with something like this, we talk about use cases, different technologies. Pilots probably are very pervasive now to try these things out in limited ways, see if they work before you expand them or shut them down. Pilots with different vendors, pilots of things that maybe you built yourself that you're rolling out in. Maybe you have an innovation wing, maybe you don't, and you're just sort of rolling it out in an area where you think people are receptive to change. And then you have to decide, is this working? Are we going to expand this, or are we shutting it down, or are we going to change something? You need a lot of discipline there. People can be, you have a lot invested in this sometime as an executive, and you kind of bet this is your horse you're betting on. You might want to throw good money after bad. So you need what we call discipline on these things. Do you think, with the pace of change, the pace of technology, I would assume pilots are much more prevalent. There's many more going on, and we want to do those right and not fall into any sort of traps here and waste time and money. Any thoughts there on generally on this pilot concept?
So be very careful with pilots because I'm sure you've seen pilotitis,
Yeah.
which is, we do 20 pilots, they actually all work.
Yeah.
But we're busy, we're distracted. It was only a pilot. I mean, we can go ahead and just kill it. Instead, I would recommend you practice a phased rollout. Now, what's the difference? Well, a pilot is a thing that comes and goes. A phased rollout says, oh, well, we're going to start with this department, and then we're going to move to the next department, and we're going to move to the next department. Now, of course, you can stop the rollout at any time, but it signals to the organization that you actually plan to implement this thing as opposed just try it and forget it.
Okay. Very good. All right. Just a final question, Dr. Halamka. Always appreciate your time. Again, our readers, the people we're trying to serve are, and there's a million titles now, the IT executives at the health systems. Some are more technology focused, some are more clinical focused. As I said, you got an alphabet soup in there now. Um, what's your and take whoever you want in that group or take them in batches or however you want to do it. I always think of this lead versus follow dynamic. There's been that element of as an IT executive, you support, which is sort of a follow dynamic. You support what operations wants and empower them, help them make decisions. There is obviously that lead element that you have to have where you're pointing things out, new technologies. You have to understand the workflows, the operational challenges, and proactively bring ideas to the workforce. So it should go both ways. What's your best piece of advice to those individuals considering everything going on with AI?
Sure. And it depends so much on the culture of your organization and your current trajectory. And let me give you an example. I talked to a very leading academic medical center, and the leaders told me the following: we're having some pretty significant budget strain right now. And so our capacity to focus on breakthrough innovation is limited because we are distracted. So, how about this? If we can focus on something that helps us get more specialty pharmacy prescribing and more ambulatory surgery scheduling, then we can sell it to the organization. But something that is just cool new technology to enhance this or that workflow will be harder. So look at your culture, look at your position, your trajectory, and decide when is the right time to introduce this stuff. I certainly have seen organizations, and there are 5 or 6 in the country at the moment that are willing to be early adopters and take some risks and see if it works or not, and then share their lessons learned. But as I say, many others are just trying to get through the day, and there'll be more in the mid to late adoption of this stuff purely because of the time and culture that we have today.
All right, Dr. Halamka, a pleasure as always. Wonderful to chat with you, and look forward to catching up with you again down the road.
Well, have a wonderful day, and I'm sure next time we talk, the technology will have changed entirely.
Take care. Thank you.